Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional from Dallas, Texas, USA, Julie K. Roberts. Julie, welcome to the show.
Good morning and welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Julie is the president of J.K. Roberts. She's also the president of PSEMA, which is Private Sector Emergency Management Association, and the PSEMA Foundation. So, Julie, before we start talking about PSEMA, a few questions for you. You have worked in both the public and private sectors for over 2 decades. How did your early experiences shape your passion for emergency management and crisis communication?
So I grew up in Texas and moved to Washington, D.C. in 2001.
Mhm.
In April of that year, I actually took a job at FEMA and was working for the leadership team there. And so I kind of got exposed into the emergency management field 20 plus years ago now.
Mm.
I was with the Bush administration, so I moved around to a number of jobs. I was in my mid 20s, and so you kind of did that in that role. Found myself working in international trade at Commerce, and I
Mhm.
joked that I negotiated. My boss negotiated, lumber and aluminum and steel 20 years ago, so it's all back here in the forefront again.
Mm.
And then I was in the Netherlands. I worked for the U.S. Embassy there.
Mhm.
And then in 2005, when I returned to the US, I moved to Tallahassee. My dad's been there, Tallahassee, Florida, for those around the world. My
Yeah.
dad has lived in Tallahassee for most of my life when my parents divorced. And so I started finding myself working in with Florida emergency management on different projects, and then took a job in 2012 at Florida Emergency Management in external affairs. I was the director. And so I had the communications, the public information, public education. And so really kind of found myself dealing with my background was communications, crisis communications. Enjoy the emergency management field because I feel like it's a way to help communities and to help individuals in their darkest times when disasters
Mm.
happen.
Mm.
And so I really kind of melded those two together and being able to talk about disasters in a way that educates people, doesn't scare them, but provides the correct information when something happens too.
Amazing. You also served leaders at the highest levels of government, from FEMA to the White House. How did some of these roles prepare you for founding your own ventures, including J.K. Roberts LLC and later PSEMA?
Being able to see leaders at the highest level. So I worked for a cabinet secretary in the Bush administration. I ran their schedule for them and seeing that interaction. And, you learn two things. One, you learn what type of a leader you want to be, and
Hmm.
you learn what type of a leader you don't want to be. So there's always, different habits or different little quirks that you may say, that's not how I want to be a leader. And so then I returned to Washington, D.C., and I was in a senior role at NOAA and managed 26 communication officials there and had that real opportunity to, again, work with leaders at all levels. I always trusted my staff. Go work, do what you need to do. And
Hmm.
I also had a chance to work with some of the most senior leaders inside of the Department of Commerce during that time, and it was and we had a female deputy secretary at the time at Commerce, and I got to work with her and see her leadership. And she come out of Fortune 500 companies, right? And so being able to take all of that and understanding how you lead large government organizations, and then being able to return to Texas after 20 years and starting my consulting business and jumping into that and saying, okay, there's a little bit of a kind of a backstory that goes all the way back to my childhood because my parents divorced when I was really little, and my mom was a single mom, raised my sister and I, and she always told me, "You can do whatever you want. Put your head down, just do it. Don't let somebody tell me I couldn't do something." And so
Hmm.
I was able to do that by serving in a presidential administration and then jumping in and starting my consulting business. And then 6 months later, seeing a need to create an association for business and industry in the disaster space
Hmm.
and founding PSEMA. It was founded 4 years ago, just about this time, in response
Hmm.
to a hurricane and questions that were coming out from that.
Wow. Let's now talk about PSEMA, which is the Private Sector Emergency Management Association. What was the inspiration to launch PSEMA in 2022?
So when I was with Florida Emergency Management, Florida has had a business, private sector, public sector office going back to 2004, 2005, when they had 6 hurricanes. So it's a robust program. I was in that role from 2013 to 2016. And
Hmm.
when I left, that position has changed. And I always say, when it comes to the private sector, if you're a company and we have a hurricane into the Gulf of Mexico here, no one wants to sit on 5 different state phone calls to figure out what's going on. And so I really just said, look, we need a place to bring together business, industry, small business, nonprofits, and our government partners
Hmm.
on the front end to say, hey, what can we do to support a community should a disaster happen? And then when a disaster does happen, we step up, we solve problems. I always say if private sector can be more resilient, then our government partners can go in there and actually respond to those catastrophic
Yeah.
events in those communities that don't have the resources.
Hmm. Hmm. And what was
It
the
was
gap? Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say it was really born out of that real need to bring everybody together at the table and give everybody a place that they can, come together and solve a problem. That was the big
I
reason.
see. Yeah, thank you. And how do you see PSEMA's real-time alerts differ from the traditional government or media updates?
So one thing with our alert, so when an event is happening, so if it's a hurricane here in the US, we will be tracking it and we have a few days notice. The California wildfires is an example that Tuesday, I started watching this fire break out and thought, oh, there's something, there was something off about it, right? I thought it was going to be a lot worse than we realized. And
Hmm.
so we issue what's called a PSEMA alert that just basically says, hey, as the association, we're following something. The next morning, we sent out an update and said, we're going to hold a phone call. And our phone calls are a little bit different in that I always joke I don't have a political boss that I have to give a bunch of attaboys to anymore.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
just jump in and we start to solve those problems.
Hmm.
And this was our first event outside of a hurricane and on the West Coast. And we had 90 different people join our phone call that day.
Wow.
And it was all about wanting that information. And so when we send out our situational reports out to our members and our partners, it focuses on what does private sector need. So
Hmm.
is it curfews or road closures or the weather that is going to change and now your business is impacted? And so it's really, I worked for NOAA and the National Weather Service is one of our parts within NOAA. And so I always say have a NOAA weather radio. We learned that with the Texas floods last month in July.
Hmm.
But it's more about providing the information so that businesses can make those decisions about either opening their business or in how to brief and tell their employees what they need to know. So
Hmm.
it's kind of a twofold. Here, we want you to reopen. And if you can't, tell us what you need, and we can tell the government side of the house if we need to. But also make sure your employees have their plans so that they can be ready to be able to, survive that disaster as well.
Hmm. And how do you share coordinates across different industries, retail, logistics, healthcare, etc., during emergencies?
So we hold a daily collaboration call, and we will do
Hmm.
that call for as many weeks as there is an interest. If it becomes 1 or 2 people on, then we move on from it.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
that's just a real opportunity, and we come in and we'll ask the question: Hey, anybody in the transportation industry? Are you having any concerns? Are you looking for information? Or it may be one of our non-government partners, maybe on Salvation Army, Red Cross, and they're looking for cots or whatever. It could be anything that they're looking for. We actually had the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles
Hmm.
looking for pack and plays for babies. They had 500 families that lost their homes,
Hmm.
and they needed pack and plays. And so it's those kind of things that somebody can come on and say, "Hey, I'm looking for," or "I have a widget and you need a widget here. Let's exchange our widgets here on the call."
Hmm. Amazing. What challenges do you face when bringing together private and public partners who may have very different priorities and very different perspectives?
Having been able to sit in both government on a state and a federal level multiple times, and now in the private sector, I
Hmm.
kind of sit in that unique position in creating PSEMA because I actually kind of understand what both bring to the table.
Yeah.
And so, what we as an association have done is work with our federal partners, with FEMA and SBA and other partners to say, hey, look, let's figure out how to work with the private sector to solve a problem. So, if you're in Texas and you need water, don't bring water in from Missouri. How
Hmm.
about you call your partners here in Texas and ask, do they have water?
Hmm.
Can we, work with them in that way? And so it's trying to, and with all the changes that are happening at FEMA and in the federal government here in DC or in the United States in particular, going to be a real need for the private sector to come in and solve those problems and support communities that maybe are not going to have the support that they've been used to.
Yeah.
And so it's really understanding what government can bring and going back to let them solve the catastrophic problems. Let them make sure power's back up and the roads are cleared. And
Mm.
then let us figure out how to go solve problems like making sure your employees are prepared ahead of time and being able to come back to work as soon as possible.
Well said. What strategies have proven to be most effective to mobilize private sector support during a disaster?
I'll tell you, the biggest thing is being able to ask them.
Hmm.
So what I am finding is we have large companies, there are companies like Walmart, and here in Texas, we joke HEB is our large grocery store here in Texas. It's family owned. They're self-sufficient. We don't need FEMA in Texas. We have HEB, we all joke. But what it is there's also companies out there that don't know how to respond and don't know how to help inside of a disaster. I had a conversation yesterday with a furniture manufacturer
Hmm.
who is looking at designing furniture for disaster survivors for after they're able to move back into their home. Because if they've
Mm.
lost everything, they haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
And so they reached out and said, hey, we have a logistics problem. We don't know how to move that furniture once we have it. And I
Mm.
said, well, guess what? We have a logistics nonprofit partner we work with. So
Mm.
therefore, we can help connect them and we'll be able to figure out how to make that move. And so what
Mm.
I have found is there are a lot of large companies and small companies that want to help. They just don't know how, and they don't know who to call at, say, a FEMA or a state because they're offering the service, and many times government's like, but we can't take that from you. And so it's
Mm.
being able to make that business to business connection as well.
Mhm.
Because if we can do that, that takes the government out of the middle of it, and we can just say, okay, here, we're going to, you need this and I have this. Let's figure out how we work together. And it maybe I donate it to you or maybe you buy it from me.
Mm.
But our goal as the association is to bring all those people together and let them figure out how we go solve problems.
Wow. What innovations in technology do you believe will shape the future of private sector emergency management?
We actually work with a company, one of our founding partners called Disaster Tech, and they have created an online platform called Pratis, which is a common operating picture that we all come together and you can see everything from road closures to power outages to now AI. And so what has been great, I was a little resistant on the AI. I just didn't understand it a year ago, but I have fully embraced that now.
Mm.
Because what I can do is I can go in there and with California and the wildfires, I put in our search terms and it was able to tell me all those things that we needed
Mm.
immediately. And so then I was able to send that out to our partners and say, hey, are you aware of? And I think, I will also say, though, we've all become very reliant upon technology on our cell phones.
Mm.
And we saw in the Central Texas flood in July that cell phones didn't work, whether it was a cell phone where they were located or the power went out. And so a lot of people did not receive those life-saving alerts because it was the middle of the night. And
Mm.
so I also encourage people and companies and emergency managers to think about what happens if there's a cyber attack and all your systems go down and then you have a tornado on top of it, right? And so we've got to, while we can embrace technology, and I'm fully embraced on that, you do still need to have some of those backup plans in your back pocket, maybe even a printed, hey, these are the 5 phone numbers I need to have on hand in
Yeah.
case everything doesn't work that morning.
Mm. You just spoke a little bit about AI. Tell me a little bit more about how you see AI and data analytics playing in enhancing PSEMA's mission.
It's been great because you can go in and what I'm finding with AI and having worked at NOAA with the Hurricane Center, and the forecast, it's going to be able to what I think I see AI going in, especially when it comes to that kind of the house of being able to help us make decisions is you can go out and look and see where that hurricane went 5 years ago and what was the impacts, right? And so what I'm finding with AI that I had been resistant to is that it's amazing that I no longer Google stuff, right? Now I put it in and I do my search into my AI chat and say, okay, this is what I'm looking for. Can you help give me the history of it?
Mm.
And I think that as emergency, and I will honestly, I worked on an exercise for a country, for an airport in another country,
Mhm.
and they wanted to build out a flood exercise for the airport. Well, I had not done that for that country. And so I dumped everything that I was looking for into AI. I didn't just take what it gave me. I'm not saying that's not the right approach at this point, But I was able to say, I want to test this, 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 and this. And then I built weather forecasts that showed what it was going to do. And the meteorologist at the country said, "My gosh, how did you do that?" And I said, "Well,
Mm,
AI, right?" And so it becomes a tool that will allow us to streamline our work and also become more creative. The human mind can only create a disaster scenario so many times, but we could really start to test and put in some of those scenarios into AI and see what could really happen
mm.
if there's an earthquake on
Yeah.
the West Coast here, tsunamis, other types of hazards that we're
Uh-huh.
not thinking about.
Wow. And you're so right. I mean, AI is enhancing our ability to know so much more data in a very, very well organized manner. But moving on, Julie, let's now talk about the PSEMA Foundation. Why was the PSEMA Foundation created, and how does it complement the main association?
So when PSEMA was formed, it's a trade association. So we are a membership based organization. And what I found actually during the wildfires were that individuals wanted to support the communities,
Mm,
but didn't know how because they're not going to join an association that wasn't the right fit.
mm,
And so we launched the foundation as another tool. It's a 501(c)(3) here in the United States, which has that tax deduction for people. But it's also an opportunity for an individual to be able to provide, if maybe they want to make a $50 donation to support our campaign. It's also an opportunity when you were talking about companies and how they support. So we work on the operational side of a company, but they have a lot of times that community relations, that CSR team that
mm,
want to be able to help community. So now we've given them a mechanism where
mm.
they can donate to the foundation side, and then we can go out and direct that into the communities that need it. It gives us a little bit more flexibility in supporting the communities on the ground
Mhm.
that maybe we didn't have under the association umbrella.
Very interesting. And one of the foundation's goals is to strengthen community resilience. What are some specific initiatives that embody this mission?
We just launched a couple of weeks ago what we are calling Signal and Shield. That is the overall preparedness campaign messaging we want to be able to tie in. And specifically, this one is called Signal and Shield Camp.
Hmm.
And that is focused on responding to the catastrophic floods that happened in Texas in July,
Mm,
where we had summer camps that were impacted and 27 were lost. And so that initiative is raising money to be able to provide a NOAA weather radio to 12,000 different camps across the United States that will provide that life saving NOAA alert or National Weather Service alert any time of day. And
mm,
so that was where we decided to kick off. I grew up in Texas. I have a lot of friends that send their kids to these camps. And watching what happened that night and knowing if they had had a radio, there would have been a better chance of understanding. But we're not just giving them the hardware, we're providing them the preparedness materials to understand what does that alert mean? When you get this, a flash flood emergency, what does it mean? And so we want to be able to then also help build out more prepared camps to respond to whether it's a fire or a tornado or there's lightning and maybe the camp directors don't realize that they need to be inside. And so it's all about building on that campaign, those camps around the country, not even just summer camps, to make them more resilient. But
mm.
overall, I always say the more resilient our communities are, whether it's a business community or a community in general, then the less we have to do when a disaster happens.
Correct, correct. Um, you just told me about the Signal and Shield Camp initiative. Tell me a little bit more about how this contributes to resilience, especially for vulnerable communities.
So anytime that you can go out and help people understand one, how to receive an alert so they can prepare, but also take action so they don't lose their life, whether it's
Hmm.
a tornado coming or that wildfire that's spreading. But it's also about being able to provide those materials and explain it to children in particular, right? So you can't like send in the materials you and I would get about how to prepare for a disaster might frighten children. When I was with Florida Emergency Management, we had a very robust kids program called Kids Get a Plan. It was 5 books and it was all written for elementary age students.
Hmm.
And it explained everything from tornadoes to fire to lightning and flash flooding. And so how do we help build those resilient communities, starting with children? I always say children then grow up to be more prepared adults, but they also come home and drive mom and dad to take action. How many people recycle because their kids came home and said, you need to recycle? But anywhere that we start to build that resiliency, whether it's with kids or with businesses, then once we get that built out, then they can help and come in and protect those other vulnerable communities. We've had conversations about reaching out to different worship houses of worship across religions, and because those are trusted resources in those communities. And so can we provide them information related to their community to help them also be able to prepare for the hazards that they see every day, whether it's they live in a flash flood area or they're in an area that has a lot of tornadoes.
Wow. And my last question for you, Julie, what advice would you give to business leaders who think emergency management or emergency response is just a government responsibility?
Oh, no, please don't think that. I encourage companies and of all sizes, whether you're a mom and pop restaurant or a Fortune 500, to think about your business continuity plan. And one of the things we are doing at PSEMA is creating an online training program that can take a business continuity program and drill it down for a small business. It might be 5 pages as opposed to 100 pages. But I always say, back to the whole beginning of this, where the more resilient we are as a business community means that when something happens, then government can respond to those vulnerable communities that don't have the resources to be able to do it. My one piece of advice is don't think government's going to show up and save you if you're a company, because that's not their job, right? And there's a misperception that there's all this money that flows after disasters, but you want to get back to business. You want to make sure your employees know what they're doing so they can come back, and you need to come back to business because unfortunately about 40% of small businesses do not reopen after a disaster in the United States. And that's way too high of a number. And so you pour your life into a company, you want to make sure it's back, even if something catastrophic happens, or you know who to ask to help. Don't rely on government. We have a lot of resources. That's our goal, is to bring the business community together. I will also say, while we've talked a lot about the United States, our goal is to eventually grow this to more of an international front as well. And so building those resilient, I joke, a lot of the countries around the world do resiliency on the business side a lot better than here in the United States. And so, our goal is to build that resilient community here in the US, but to also continue that around the world as well.
Fascinating. And on that note, Julie, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been. Thank you for speaking to me about your own incredible journey. And thank you for speaking to me at such length about PSEMA and the PSEMA Foundation. I think I learned some very, very interesting things about how you are supporting so many businesses on how to handle emergency management. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.